Welcome to my channel Stars and Stripes Stories. Today's story is one you will never forget, a story that begins quietly with an ordinary passenger in seat 13F, and ends with the skies filled with salutes from some of the world's finest pilots. The flight was routine, or at least it seemed that way. A commercial jet lifted off from Dallas, bound for Washington, D.C. The passengers had settled in, business travelers scrolling through presentations, a few families juggling snacks and toys, and some college students already asleep. Nothing seemed unusual, except for one woman who sat quietly in 13F. She was young, mid-30s perhaps, her dark hair tied back neatly. She wore no uniform, just jeans and a plain sweater. To anyone watching, she looked like just another passenger. She barely spoke, simply gazing out the window as the plane climbed higher through a sky brushed with fading sunlight. But the air crew noticed something about her. When turbulence shook the plane, her eyes didn't flinch. When an announcement came over the intercom about a reroute due to military training in the area, she didn't seem surprised. She simply adjusted her seatbelt and kept her eyes on the clouds below. What no one on that plane knew, at least not yet, was that 13F had once belonged to someone the United States Air Force still whispered about. Someone whose call sign, when spoken, carried weight in every squadron. Someone whose presence alone could bring hardened fighter pilots to their feet. At 30,000 feet, the comm was broken. The captain came on the intercom, his voice steady but serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to hold our position. Military aircraft are operating in the area. You may see them outside your windows. Nothing to be alarmed about." Sure enough, moments later, the sleek shape of two F-22 Raptors cut across the sky, their silver wings glinting in the sunlight. They weren't close enough to be threatening, but passengers leaned toward their windows in awe. Children pressed their noses to the glass. A businessman muttered, "That's some escort." The woman in 13F, however, simply closed her eyes. She knew the sound of those engines. She knew the way those jets moved, the sharp tilt of their wings, the precision of their formation. Her mind wasn't in the cabin anymore, it was back in another cockpit, years ago, when she had once flown beside them. The F-22s moved into a parallel formation, one on each side of the commercial jet. It was unusual, enough to stir whispers throughout the cabin. The captain's voice returned, this time lower, almost uncertain. Ladies and gentlemen, this is unexpected. The military aircraft have requested contact with one of our passengers. Seat 13F. The entire cabin fell silent. Heads turned toward the quiet woman by the window. She looked up slowly, realizing all eyes were on her. "Ma'am," a flight attendant said gently, "they've asked if you would respond. Do you have aviation experience?" For the first time since boarding, the woman spoke. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "Yes." The attendant, confused but trusting, handed her the radio phone connected to the cockpit. She pressed it to her ear, her hand steady as stone. "This is civilian flight 227, patching through passenger in seat 13F, the captain said. The woman spoke just 3 words. Her call sign, Valkyrie. 3-1. There was a pause on the line. And then, the sound of a young F-22 pilot's voice, cracking with disbelief. "Ma'am, say again." She repeated it, steady and clear. "Valkyrie. 3-1. The radio went silent for a heartbeat. And then, the tone of every voice on the frequency changed. It was no longer businesslike. It was reverent. "Copy that. Valkyrie, it's an honor." Inside the cockpit of the Raptors, the pilots exchanged quick looks. They knew the name. Everyone in their community did. Valkyrie wasn't just a pilot, she was legend. Years back, during a mission no one fully understood because so much was classified, her squadron had been ambushed deep in hostile territory. Radar jammed, outnumbered, fuel running low. Every textbook said it should have ended in disaster. But it didn't. Because Valkyrie had led them out. She had flown through impossible odds, executing maneuvers that later instructors at the weapons school would call borderline physics-defying. She had taken hits to her jet, damage that should have sent her spiraling, but she stayed in the fight until every one of her wingmen made it home. They said she landed her bird with one engine, half her avionics fried, and fuel tanks nearly dry. And when she stepped out, still in her helmet, the base erupted in cheers. She didn't ask for medals, but she got them. She didn't ask for recognition, but stories about her became almost myth. And then, quietly, she disappeared. Retired, vanished into civilian life, never chasing the spotlight. And now here she was, sitting in seat 13F on a commercial jet, wearing jeans and a sweater. Outside, the Raptors adjusted their formation. Slowly, deliberately, they dipped their wings, a gesture of respect. Every pilot watching through the cockpit glass understood. They weren't protecting the airliner anymore. They were saluting one of their own. Inside the cabin, passengers whispered in confusion. A little boy asked, "Mom, why are the fighter jets bowing?" She didn't know how to answer. But the woman in 13F did. She leaned toward the window, placed her hand against the glass, and gave a small nod. No bravado, no pride. Just quiet acknowledgement. The radio crackled again. "Valkyrie, ma'am, welcome home." The captain of the commercial jet turned in his seat, eyes wide. You flew with them, didn't you?" The woman smiled faintly. Once. As the flight continued, the F-22 stayed in escort, flanking the jet until it neared its destination. When the city lights came into view, they broke off, climbing sharply into the dusk. But before they disappeared, both jets tilted once more in a final salute. The passengers on board erupted into applause. They didn't fully understand what they had just witnessed, but they knew it was something extraordinary. The woman in 13F only bowed her head, her hand still resting against the window, as if saying goodbye to old friends. When the plane landed, people hesitated to leave. Many stopped by her row, whispering thanks though they didn't even know for what. One elderly veteran, walking slowly with his cane, stopped and gave her a trembling salute. She returned it with quiet dignity. Outside, beyond the terminal glass, the last glimmer of afterburners faded into the night sky. For most of the world, seat 13F had just been another passenger. But for those who knew the call sign, for those who flew with her or grew up hearing stories about the day she refused to leave anyone behind, she would always be Valkyrie. And in the silence of that terminal, as the crowd dispersed, one truth lingered: heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they sit quietly among us, unnoticed, until the sky itself reminds us who they are. So next time you board a plane, remember this story. Remember the woman who carried a call sign that could bring fighter pilots to their knees in salute. She was only a passenger, until the world remembered her wings. Thank you for watching Stars and Stripes Stories. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who believes in quiet courage, in sacrifice, and in the kind of legends who walk among us every day.